This is Beekeeper Confidential, a show about the curious lives of bees and their beekeepers. I'm your host, Mandy Shaw. Today's guest is a passionate educator, bee removal expert, and bee priestess. Since 2012, Beelieve Hawaii's founder, Jasmine Joy, has been sharing her love and compassion for bees and pollinators through saving bee colonies from extermination, developing habitat restoration, and creating a sacred space for children to come and learn and explore the world of bees. Her contributions to the bee community are profoundly beautiful and significant, and it was such a delight to spend an evening cozied in my studio with a glass of prosecco, listening to her wisdom and enjoying the surprise thunderstorm that moved over during our conversation. Meet Jasmine Joy of Beelieve Hawaii.
I was originally working for a company called Honeygirl Organics on the North Shore of Oahu, and it's an organic skincare line. So I was probably the third person that the founder taught how to make his whole product line. So all the formulas and everything. And the founder, his name is Anthony Maxfield. He's also currently the president of Hawaii Beekeepers Association.
Oh. And so before that, did you have any prior interest or experience with bees? Or was this your introduction to the bee world?
That was my introduction, but I also had a childhood introduction, which was very, I don't know if the word is minimal, but it was very discreet. So I'm half Nicaraguan and half Filipino. Both of my parents are immigrants, and I was born in Los Angeles, California. And my abuelito, so my grandfather on my Nicaraguan side, used to keep bees. And it was one of my earlier memories that he brought me to the bottom of this grassy hill, and he had a beehive on top of the hill there. Oh, wow. And I just remember seeing white boxes stacked on top of each other and him wearing this white suit, and he looked like an astronaut. And then before he left me at the base of the hill, he said, "No matter what happens, don't be afraid." And then I saw him walk up the hill and open the lid and go inside of the hive. And I don't even remember bees. I just remember him saying, "Don't be afraid."
That sounds magic.
It is magic. I was probably maybe 4.
Oh, so a very, very early memory. Wow.
Yeah. And then when I was 8 years old, I stopped seeing that side of my family, and so I lost connection with my grandfather, and I don't think I would have learned how to beekeep from him anyways. I was in the environment when I saw him do it, but I didn't have the understanding of bees when I was that young. And so my connection to nature and Mother Nature as my muse, I was born with that. Nobody taught me how to be connected to nature. Mm-hmm. It's always been innate, and it's part of my destiny for me to eventually connect with the bees again. And my housemate, and she became my best friend, her name's Haley. She was working for the company originally, and I stayed in this little cottage, like the surf cottage behind the main house in Sunset Beach on the North Shore. And then I would see her bring boxes home of these little samples, and they were all samples from Honeygirl Organics. And she would just be screwing the caps on or putting stickers on. That's what she would be doing, is labeling them. And I'm like, oh, what's this all about? And she's like, oh, this is who I work for. And they're up there in Pupukea, which is this hill up on the North Shore. And so I told her that I was looking for a job because I was living in town originally, which is the South Shore. And then I had this boyfriend that lived on the North Shore, and I moved in with him. And so I was looking for work, and So I started work. She brought me into Honeygirl Organics, and her and I were the only ones inside the creamery manufacturing their whole product line. And so we were like their alchemists.
I just had a vision of like, Laverne and Shirley. Did you ever watch that show? It's from the 1970s. They were like best friends, roommates, and they worked at, I think it was a soda factory or something, but the whole intro scene, like it's the two of them working on the line.
Well, in the creamery there, we called it the manifestation room. And so we really kept it very, very sacred, and we understood that anything that was said in that room, it was just like magic,
Wow.
Whatever we say are spells or curses. So every product that we made would always have our good intentions. We were just thinking these good thoughts. And yeah, and then basically that's when we really, I had a little honeygirl tribe from there. I brought in my friend Michaela, who's this amazing flower fairy. And then we started having women's circles, real little ones. It was just 4 of us. And then our friend Katie joined later. And then that's when we really started tapping into like ancient wisdom and realizing that we were all soul sisters and witches back in the days. And we just have come back in real life. But as these, like, the word witch has such a bad stereotype to it. It's just a woman of wisdom.
Right.
And, the witches back then were the herbalists going into the forest and harvesting things to help heal their families and whoever. They were the doulas.
Do you think that the perception of witches is changing?
Yes, very much so. And the word witch has taken on different names. Like, I love to play different archetypes, and being a bee priestess is one of them I've really stepped into. And it's just about holding sacred space for not just the bees, but all the pollinators, all creatures of the world. But I have a special connection with the pollinators. I'm like a whisperer,
Well, you certainly are. I mean, I've seen on Instagram some of the complex removals that you've done of honeybee colonies from structures, and I am just always blown away because you're a powerhouse. You go in there and you do it, but always with a smile. And I think that it's because you have that intuition and that like deep respect for the bee colony as a whole. All that stuff. You're cool.
Aww. Thank you, Mandy, for seeing that and honoring that. And you're absolutely right. Before I do any rescue, I always say a prayer, and I don't ever really include that on Instagram. That when I just held and hosted my first women's retreat. I had guidelines that in the opening ceremony when I introduced the altar and the medicine wheel, how we honored all 4 directions. And one of the guidelines was, I told the women that it was really cute. I had this beautiful patina butterfly bell that I would ring whenever ritual would begin or whenever a meal was prepared and ready. And so I said that whenever the bell was rang, in between the ringings, the chimes, that it was a no-phone zone, and especially during ritual because it's so sacred, Like, I mean, look at this day of age we're in, and everybody's just on their screen, and so am I. But I try to be very mindful, like even in the morning, because I do have like this rescue hotline for the honeybees. I try to turn my phone on after 9 a.m. So I usually wake up before 9 a.m. every day, and I try to have my morning practice of getting on my mat, doing a little meditation, and just setting some good intention, saying a prayer. And that's what I do too when I'm rescuing the honeybees. So back to what I was saying is I don't usually share on my stories the little prayers I say, but my handyman, Elko, who is my brother over here in Hawaii, we have everybody's your sister and your brother, your auntie, your uncle. And him and I, honestly, we just have the best time saving bees together. It never feels like work. We're always cracking up, having a good time. And he won't ever cut into a wall until he's like, he goes, "Hey sis, did you pule already?" And that's another Hawaiian word. Pule means prayer. So he won't even cut into a wall. Yeah, and he he notices the difference, Mandy, because maybe there's been like one or two times where he didn't even think about it and was just like started opening up the wall, and then the girls just start coming out and bombing him.
Oh my gosh.
And then he goes, "Oh, sis, you didn't say your pule." And I go, "Well, you're just moving too fast, you know." But he doesn't forget anymore.
Yeah. Is it a silent prayer, or is it something that you
No,
say or sing out loud to them?
Oh, yeah. And it's usually pretty much the same. I always say, "Hey, sweet honeybees, we're here to help you, not hurt you. So please be gentle with us, and we'll do our best to be gentle with you."
I think that every beekeeper can take the 3 seconds to say that to their bee colonies, or even a swarm or a cutout before they engage with them. Just take that moment and introduce yourself and introduce your intentions.
Yeah. I talk to every single colony, even if it's just one bee to a cluster of bees. And some beekeepers who have been beekeeping longer than me, and more specifically males, have told me that now they talk to their bees ever since that they've met me and known me, and they see that I talk to my bees, because before even if they're spiritual beekeepers, they said they just thought felt they had a connection, but now they literally talk to the bees.
Wow. I mean, I talk to my bees even while I'm working with them. I'll chat, I'll sing. I think it helps me feel good, and then they pick up on that.
Yeah, I love that.
Beekeeping on an island must be so different than it is here. But one thing that we must have in common, at least for those of us in the Pacific Northwest, is the moisture.
The advantage that Hawaii has in beekeeping is we just have 6 months of wet, 6 months of dry. And even though 6 months are wet, the sun will still come out, usually like intermittent rain. And so that's why the bees go off over here, and that's why Hawaii is a huge queen bee producer. Out of Big Island, mostly. They raise mite-resistant queens over there, too. I think Kona does, but multiple companies on the Big Island.
So with the 6 months of wet weather, are there any issues with mold or too much condensation build up within the hive?
Yeah. So depending on what area of the island, on all of the islands that your bees are at, you got to make sure you're putting them in a place that dries up, because there's some places like in the back of the valley where it's just like always wet.
Oh.
And then we have a problem with termites over here and ants.
Oh.
So we got all the pests. We got termites, ants, we got mites, and we got beetles. And the beetles thrive. Yeah, the beetles thrive. I think they've been here. The mite got here in 2006, and the beetles were probably right before it. But I started beekeeping in 2011, so I've only known beekeeping with these two pests here, and it sucks. But my partner has been beekeeping like double the time as me. I've been beekeeping for like 8 years, and he's been beekeeping for like 15. And so he was beekeeping here at the time when we didn't have the mite yet, and he said he used to be able to stack his boxes 5-6 high and not even have to check on them every 2 weeks.
Wow. Jasmine's educational program was designed for 3rd graders and focuses on teamwork, beekeeping, pollination, local traditions, and creating pollinator-friendly habitats.
One big reason why I've developed the pollinator program, where I tailored it for 3rd grade level, and then I just alter it to any grade level after I created the curriculum. And then I created it at Ho'a Aina o Makaha, which is one of the farms where my bees are at. It's a 40-year-old nonprofit on the west side here. Wow. And right next door to it is a school called Makaha Elementary. So there's a partnership between the 5-acre farm and the school, and every grade level has a project or like a garden on the farm. And I worked with 3rd graders because their responsibility was animal caretaking. So we have a little area where there's like rabbits and goats and geese and ducks and
those
fish.
Are lucky kids.
Mm-hmm.
They're
And
so
bees.
lucky. And bees.
They are super lucky. So once I developed the program after a couple years of really establishing it there at the farm and working 2 years in a row with the third graders, and each year I worked with 4 third grade classes, so that's like 100 kids each year. And then now my program has taken off this year, but at an outreach level, both. So I do, if schools can afford to bring a group, I do homeschool groups too, but if a school has a budget for an excursion, they'll drive out to the west side, and there's this bee house that's screened halfway through, and there's 3 rows of benches where I can fit about 25, 30 small kids and adults. And then on the other side of the screen, I have 3 hives where nobody on the other side has to suit up because I'm the one with the bees, and I put the frames right up to the screens, and it's really cool.
I cannot think of anybody else who's doing something like that. Who has
Really?
that setup. I mean, that's amazing to give the kids front row seats in a setting where they're completely safe. That's so amazing.
Yeah. Oh, Mandy, it really is. And I'm raising these kids to not be afraid of bees. I'm trying to change the stigma of the fear of bees, just like people are afraid of sharks. And there's amazing shark conservationists now out there that have really changed people's perception of fear toward these animals that could, like, the shark could just eat you alive, and the honeybee has this venom that can sting you, and if you're allergic, you could die.
But the chances of dying from a bee sting or a shark attack are just so low.
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly. Now, somebody like Bethany Hamilton, bless her soul, she's such an idol, getting bit by that shark and losing her arm, and still look at her. She's a mother. She still surfs. She rips. Like, it's almost like that was a part of her destiny.
That's powerful. I mean, people that are fulfilling their destinies, they're so immersed, and even when there's tragedy, if they can still get past that, it makes them so much more powerful. And
yeah, and I think most of it has to do with faith in whatever you believe in, faith in love, really, because that's what God is. I don't see any separation. But with, like I was just mentioning, Bethany Hamilton, she has this immense faith in Christ. So she has this Christ consciousness, and that's why she's like, I don't want to give up. She gets her dad to put a handle on her board so her one arm she can't push up anymore, but she pulls herself up. It's amazing.
I am not a religious person, but since I've started working with bees, they are just so incredible in their society and all of the amazing things that they're capable of, that they do make me believe in a higher power.
Wow, that's really special. I mean, look at how adorable they are. And they just, like, look at you when you open up the hive, like, oh, hey.
Yes.
And people think of them as, like, terrifying. I just don't get that. And so, I feel like if I can teach as many kids as I can, they will grow up to always at least appreciate the honeybees. And I tell them, if you are a little afraid, just step back. And I do an example, like today I just taught Waldorf school. And I go, don't do this. And I just, like, did this funny dance and pretend I was swatting everything. And they're like, they laughed at me. And I go, you don't want to do that. I go, they're going to want to sting you because they think you're harming them. I go, just stand back and watch them do their work and respect them. They're working for free. I call them the truest light workers of our planet.
I wanted to know what Jasmine's most haunting or enchanting bee removal was, and her answer did not disappoint.
It was at Bishop Museum, and Bishop Museum is over 100 years old. So Bishop was the first guy on the island here to purchase a beehive. And
oh my gosh.
He has his own museum. Yeah. So This was like, I want to say 1845, 1875. It's in that time where the initial beehive that was meant to come to Hawaii, it came from the East Coast. So it had to go around the Cape and everything, and then the beehive like melted and died before it could even go around that.
Oh.
And so they decided that they would try from San Jose, California, and they put the beehive on ice or surrounded it with ice so it wouldn't melt, and it made it.
Wow.
That's
amazing, because do you think that the ice also sort of put the bees into like
a torpor?
Yeah.
I don't know. But so the hive made it, and then Bishop purchased it. And then somehow, I don't know if there were a couple of brothers who were the first official beekeepers on Oahu. I don't know if they bought the bees from Bishop, but somehow the hive ended up in Nu'uanu Valley, or the same stock of bees that Bishop had. And then it was Nu'uanu Valley where the bees started swarming. And so when you go there, the place is called Pali, which means cliff. And there's a Pali lookout, and there's a sign when you get there, a sign with a bee on it, and it says, "Watch out for flying bees," or because that area, the trade winds blow right through there, and the bees just like flow through with the trade winds. They're moving so fast, they're just like probably flying. Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, do you hang out there all the time? Do you put bait hives along that? Do you even need to put up bait hives? I'm getting us off track. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just put them on a little cliffside right there. They'll move right in. But I think they live all wild in the trees there in the cliffs and the valleys. And so let's bring it back to Bishop Museum.
Yes.
I was just giving a little history on him. And so we're at Bishop Museum, and the bees are in between one of their older buildings called Hawaiian Hall, and there was an add-on janitor room, maybe 20 years, it was still in the early 1900s that they added on this janitor room, which was like parallel to the wall of the Hawaiian Hall. And so it was like an extension of it. The bees moved in between the janitor room and the Hawaiian Hall. In between, there was a void area, and they were going in through this crack in the stone wall. And so when we did the removal, we usually cut in from the inside through drywalls. It's just aesthetically easier to patch up, and most of our clients prefer it than us cutting into the outside of their house. And so here's my handyman, Elko. He's got his sawzall, and he starts it up, and he's trying to put the blade through the wall, and then he turns it off. He's like, "Sis, this isn't drywall." And I'm like, "What is it?" And he's like, "I mean, it's some kind of sheetrock." Like, he goes, "Oh, I knew I should have brought my wet saw." He had to drive all the way to the east side, and probably took him about like an hour or something to go and come back, maybe a little bit longer. He comes back, and his wet saw blade is just the perfect size to cut through this wall, Mandy, that turns out to be concrete with steel mesh and rebar.
Oh my gosh. What?
Yeah, and so my brother Elko goes, "Yeah, sis, they made stuff like this back in the early 1900s. They don't make places like this, structures like this anymore." And I'm like, "Tell me about it." Plus, this hive I left out has been there. Okay, the staff at Bishop said probably 2 years. Try like 3 years. Because you asked me to tell you an interesting story where days after I'm just like enchanted by it, is the bees chose to move into the wall after they brought back the cape that they gave to Captain James Cook when he first came to the Hawaiian Islands. This cape is made of millions of honeycreeper feathers.
What's a honeycreeper?
honeycreeper are endemic birds that exist nowhere else in the world other than here in Hawaii, and on Big Island is where they thrive the most. And so most of them are red colored or gold. And in ancient time, the Hawaiians would put sticky resin on the branches of trees so the honeycreeper birds could land on them and get stuck. And then they would pluck some of their feathers. They didn't kill them. They respected them. But they it's like Native American style. So they would get some of their feathers and they would make a cape out of their feathers and wear it, and only the royalty would wear them.
Whoa.
Yeah. So when Captain James Cook came, one of the kings took his own cape off and put it on Captain James Cook. They thought he was the god Lono, because when Captain James Cook, he came and they saw his European, ships with the masts and the sails that looked like the depiction of the god Lono. And the Hawaiians were, they were voyagers also, but they made their things out of senet, which was made of lauhala. It's a type of pandanus tree that's super, super just strong. I mean, imagine they're making senet with it, so they're braiding pieces of rope that they're using to voyage. Yeah. Anyways, so he gives the cape to Captain James Cook, and then Captain James Cook leaves. Captain James Cook that first time came here, and it was the season of makahiki, which is the season of harvest, and it was Lono's season. So the Hawaiians were like amazed. They were like, wow, we really praised him this year. Here he is. Well, when Captain James Cook left and came back, he went somewhere else to voyage, and when he returned, makahiki season was over. And then the Hawaiians, they realized that they thought he was an imposter, and they took the cape away and killed him. Yeah. And so that cape, Mandy, somehow ended up in New Zealand, and I want to say 2-3 years ago, they gave it back to Bishop Museum. They gave it back to Hawaii. They let us borrow it. So that cape is the one where the bees are behind.
That is so crazy.
That was my record hive removal. We had to go back the next day. The whole job in total took us about 12 hours to do. 12 to 15 hours. Yeah, so we put in a solid 8 hours that first day and had to come back the next day, vacuum up the rest of the bees, and then close up the wall because the hive was humongous and it filled up my bee vacuum bin totally. There was easily 25,000 bees in there. So the first round we probably got 15 to 20,000 bees and had to come back and get the rest of them. Yeah, it was incredible. And then Bishop Museum, the whole staff, that janitor room was like a huge observation hive because the bees were all over the windows attracted to the sunlight. And the bishop staff would walk by a tour and just take pictures of the bees from the windows.
That is so wild. I love that story. I think I'm going to be haunted by it, just thinking about the bees and the cape. And was there some magic that happened that attracted them to that spot above other spots?
But the honeycreeper feathers, the fact that they're honeycreeper feathers. They're honeycreeper birds. So the honeycreeper birds, they have special little beaks that are curled. Some of them aren't curled, but the ones that are curled could specifically go in endemic and native flowers that other birds can't because it's the shape. So I'm sure it pollinates all the endemic and native flowers and flora too, and trees.
We went in a really big circle.
Yeah, so what I was going to say earlier, before we got in the huge cycle of life, is that Anthony, my first guru, so the founder of Honeygirl Organics, he also taught me how to remove wild beehives. So my ex-partner at the time was working at Waimea Valley, which is a huge botanical garden on the North Shore. It's Pupukea, which is the hillside where Honeygirl Organics headquarters is. It looks over into the valley of Waimea where the botanical garden is. So it's all, we call it Ahupua'a, which is the land division from mountain to sea. So it's all connected. And because my partner was a cultural educator there in the valley, I was very connected to that community. And once Anthony taught me how to catch swarms and do cutouts, they would always get swarms. And there was a waterfall in Waimea Valley. So by the time they'd call me and then I would clock out of Honeygirl Organic, I would get there and they'd be like, oh, they took off. They went above the waterfall. And I'm like, dang it. But Waimea Valley was the first place where I kept my first hive. And so the very first hive that I cut out was my first hive. And then I realized there was a need to do live hive removals because the exterminators were still killing them at that time in 2011.
Whoa.
It wasn't until maybe 4 or 5 years ago that now they don't let, or I think some exterminators still do sometimes, but most of them, they know better. Yeah. They have me on Rolodex. I've cold called probably 20 or more exterminators here on the island, and so they give me referrals all the time. Wow. And since they can't kill them, they say, well, here's our bee lady, she'll take care of you. Yeah, so I started Beelieve Hawaii in 2012. I started at Honeygirl in 2011, so I didn't skip a beat. I jumped right into apiculture, and Anthony was my first guru, and then I was self-taught mostly after that, and I've had a partner for about 4.5 years who, like I said earlier, has been beekeeping like 15 years. And so I've learned a lot of things from him and just doing all the bee removals that I do. And then after a couple years or so, I started really having the eye to find the queen, and my chances of finding the queen every cutout or rescue are pretty high, in the 90 percentile.
That's impressive.
Now Thank you.
Super impressive.
Yeah, and like you were saying earlier, Mandy, it's a deep connection that we have with the bees in order to find her. Mm-hmm. And now what the next level where I'm at is, besides, sharing my pollinator program and doing outreach, now I do one-on-one mentorship. And I started mentoring a sweet friend of mine, and that's being whoever I mentor, I become close to them, because no matter what age they are, especially men. And then when I work with men, then it's like I introduce this softness into their world, and it's not gay, or it's not, and that's where there's an imbalance in society, is that within us, we have a masculine and a feminine side. It's important for us to keep ourselves balanced. Mm-hmm. And so I love working with men because I could be quite masculine myself. Currently, I'm working with like a senior citizen, and his name's Uncle Bucky, and then I have a younger male student, like in his early 20s. It's so interesting just working with them. I really enjoy it. I learn as much from them as much as they learn from me, probably in some ways.
I love that. I want to beekeep with you.
Well, you're welcome to come to Hawaii. And
oh my gosh. I've been looking forward to this conversation so much.
Me too. I love all beekeepers, and especially guardians, but I have a special place in my heart for strong women, badass.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and I loved how when we were private messaging each other, and you have it spot on when you called me a powerhouse, because in numerology, my foundation, I'm an 8, so that is powerhouse. And then you said how you're Mighty Mouse.
Yes.
Because I'm 5'2" and you're 5'4".
I'm 5'4", weighing in at 100 pounds.
Boss babe.
Yeah, totally.
Aww,
thank you.
Thank you so much. My honey heart's overflowing.
Oh. Well, this has been wonderful.
Thanks, Mandy.
Yeah. I will talk with you soon, okay?
You take care. Aloha.
Aloha. To learn more about Jasmine and Beelieve Hawaii, visit my blog at waggleworkspdx.com. I'll include pictures and links from today's episode. If you're enjoying the show, consider leaving a review and liking Beekeeper Confidential on Facebook and Instagram. You can also become a patron of the show by visiting patreon.com/Mandy Shaw. I appreciate each and every one of you for listening to the show to hear the stories of our guests. Beekeeper Confidential has had almost 25,000 downloads since it first started in September of 2018, and we have listeners from all over the globe. Being able to share these stories to a global audience proves the point that we all have bees in common, regardless of our beekeeping practices. We've all been touched and forever changed because of our love for bees. Until next time, may the buzz be with you. Beekeeper Confidential is a Waggleworks production and is written and produced by Mandy Shaw.